So as Summer mentioned, I'm Bob Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Canna Advisors. I'm in my 7th year with Canna Advisors, and during that time, I've personally worked with clients in 30 US states to this point. Prior to joining Canna Advisors, I did some executive work with a few technology firms, both public and private, and then decided to take a spin at the cannabis industry. Real quick background on Canna Advisors. We're headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. That's where our founding partners opened their first medical marijuana dispensary back in 2009. In Colorado at the time, you had to be vertical, so they opened 2 cultivations as well as that dispensary. And it was a little bit of a hostile time to get into the cannabis industry. They were getting threatening letters from the DEA. Their 4-year-old daughter had her savings account shut down because they were in the cannabis industry. So in addition to operating that business, they had to become advocates for the industry. And it was through that work as advocates that they started getting questions about obtaining licenses in other states. So in 2012, they started working with a group in Connecticut to pursue one of 4 licenses that Connecticut was going to issue. And they won one of those licenses, and soon they were getting other inquiries. So they formed Canna Advisors back in 2012, end of 2012. Here we are 10 years later. We've worked in 33 US states as Canna Advisors, specifically helping people navigate the licensing process and then get their businesses up and running. Mississippi has some unique aspects to it, and Summer's going to go into those. Mostly we're going to talk about what it's going to take to put together and submit an application that's going to meet the state requirements and put you in a position to be awarded that license. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Summer and let her go through more of the regulations and what it's going to take.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Bob. Hey everybody, as Bob said, my name's Summer Thomas. I'm the Director of Regulatory Operations here at Canna Advisors. I'm an attorney by education. I got my law degree from the University of Florida. I'm licensed to practice law in Florida and in Colorado. I have a legal background in tax, business, and administrative law. I'm also a member of NORML, the State Regulations Committee of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and part of the International Cannabis Bar Association. In my free time, not a lot of it with all the licensing work, but I volunteer for Expunge Colorado and for the National Association for Criminal Defense Lawyers, helping out Last Prisoner Project with expungement work there. Which reminds me of something actually I hadn't planned on talking about today, but quickly I'll just mention Alan Russell. If you haven't heard of Alan Russell, he was just sentenced to life in prison for possession of 1.5 ounces of cannabis. It's because of his prior convictions that they supposedly went so harshly on him. There aren't a lot of recourses for appeal for Alan, but I just encourage you. It was a Mississippi case to look into Alan's case and potentially help to advocate for some changes, further changes in Mississippi. Okay, so with that, I'll get to our presentation here. There's our beautiful mugs. All right, so let's start off with a quick timeline to set the stage. Mississippi first passed the medical program via referendum in November of 2020. But as you may know, that was overturned by the Mississippi Supreme Court on, I think, what were very questionable grounds, questionable procedural grounds, actually, not even on the merits of the referendum. Then it was repassed legislatively in February 2022. Governor Tate Reeves signed that into law as the Mississippi Medical Cannabis Act. So right now we have 2 departments that are overseeing the rollout of the business licenses. The Mississippi Department of Revenue will issue the dispensary licenses, and the Department of Health will issue all the other license types. So just dispensary off on its own with the Department of Revenue. The regulations for dispensing came out in May, and those were last updated June 24th. You can find those on their website. With regulations for cultivation and processing being finalized in early June. That was right as the application was coming out. They were finalizing those regulations. Those are also all in a laundry list of those on their website. For the license applications themselves, those opened June 1st for cultivation and opened on July 1st for dispensing. And those don't have any set closing date right now, so you're still open to apply for any of the licenses that they have available. Per the statute, the licenses will be awarded within 30 days of submission. According to that timeline, they would start rolling out at the start of July, which they did. Mississippi hit that deadline. They started approving applications for cultivation and processing on July 5th. You can find that list on their website. So far, they have released 7 awards for licenses for cultivation, processing, transport, and disposal. The website for the Department of Health says that medical cannabis products will likely become available to patients in late 2022 to allow time for cultivation to start and required safety testing as well. That may be a little bit of a quick deadline, but we'll see. So far, Mississippi has pretty well hit their targets, though just barely, just by the skin of their teeth. So, I would say likely it will take a little longer for facilities to be built out, and then for operations to get rolling. Of course, it takes 4 months to grow your cannabis plants before they're ready to even be sold. Okay, so let's move on now and talk more about some of the administrative application and submission information. Like I alluded to, the applications available are cultivation, processing, testing, waste disposal, transportation, and dispensing. There are ownership restrictions on the number of licenses, and vertical licensing isn't required and also is not barred. However, no individual or entity can have a direct ownership or economic interest in over 10% of one cultivation, processing, or more than 5 dispensary licenses. The application process style right now is an open window with no close date, and there are no limit on the number of licenses at the state level. However, local jurisdictions could opt out, and that window has passed. So you need to check with your local jurisdiction whether or not they opted in or out of the program. And then also we can talk more about local licensing a little bit later, but those local jurisdictions can set what they call time, manner, and place restrictions. That's just something that's common for any local municipality or place with home rule jurisdiction to be able to set for any business. They can say that they don't want, they don't want a dispensary right on Main Street or something like that. Another thing to keep in mind for this application is its length and the formatting. The state's just been a little bit muddy with some of the instructions, mostly just leaving it up to the businesses, how they want to submit their operating plans, SOPs, other manuals like that. So just go with whatever standard for your business. This can make it a little bit difficult to know exactly what graders want, right? How long is your answer supposed to be? How succinct? Just keep in mind, you don't want to inundate graders. You don't want to give them, hundreds of pages of frivolous information. But you also don't want to miss points. You want to make sure to hit all of the regulations and cite everything that they ask for in the questions. And then lastly, just make sure that it's easily readable. You don't know who's going to be grading this application. Somebody's putting on their readers and squinting, trying to see your application. Just make sure you're not using any crazy fonts or weird spacing or colors or things like that make it hard to read. And you'll also be submitting this online via portal. So most of your answers will be electronic. As for communication with the state, expect, most states don't have a ton of resources to go towards answering questions all day long about the license process. So they're a little slow to respond. But we have gotten answers from the state, so keep an eye out there. Also, definitely keep checking their websites. They've been putting a lot of information up on the Department of Revenue and Department of Health websites, and continuously updating that over the past few weeks as new developments occur. All right, next up for the application, you're going to need background checks. You'll send your fingerprints to the Department of Health, and that's required for all employees or persons with an economic interest. And you'll also be required to submit an affidavit stating that you haven't committed one of those disqualifying felonies that they have listed. That's one that teams often overlook. Maybe one person just forgot to get their background check and it holds up the whole application process. So just best to make sure everyone on your team is aware of background checks and of all of the disqualifying felonies before you submit your application. That's definitely one that would get it kicked back. Let's see. And then I'll just quickly touch on residency. That is required for our micros. And like I mentioned, you'll submit via that online portal. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit more about the application components, some of the more substantive things. When we're approaching any application or business planning, we're always thinking about sort of what we call the pillars, but some of these main buckets of information. So your financials, your property, having local approval, and making sure that you have just all of your ducks in a row when it comes to planning out your business. So for this presentation, we're going to focus mostly on cultivation, processing, and dispensing. Those are generally the most competitive license types, and those are the ones you may encounter some more competitiveness, when it comes to the distancing or in local jurisdictions. So first, we'll just quickly touch on finances, a bit on taxes here. Tax permits are going to be required. So you'll have to sign up for one of those online. It's a pretty painless process as long as they, once they have the portal ready. There are two taxes associated with the sale of medical cannabis, one a 5% excise tax and then another 7% sales tax for dispensaries. And then also check at the local level. There are special levies in Jackson and Tupelo. So check with your municipality to see if there are any, extra charges or fees. Also then related to your finances are your financial plans. So, when you're putting together your financial plan, it's a good idea to take into account what sorts of taxes are going to be required. Financial plans are explicitly required for the cultivation and manufacturing license applications. Finances aren't specifically mentioned in the dispensary operating plan, but always good to have your finances in order and to have an idea of how you're going to carry out your business and get your operations going. All right, then next is property. Lock it down. Yep, that's what you want to do with your property. Make sure you get that secured. You will need proof of authorization to occupy. That's what the state calls it, the property for the proposed dispensary location. Same goes for cultivation and processing. You'll need also a floor plan and sketch or a construction plan, depending on where you are with your build out process, whether you're just have a blank, maybe empty piece of land, or if you have a prior facility you're using, or, maybe you have a current facility that's up and ready to go. You'll also need to put together a distance survey with a surveyor to measure the distances between some of the prohibited locations like churches, schools, that sort of thing. And then lastly, make sure you're paying attention to local zoning. A lot of people overlook this. You're so busy looking at the state statutes and regulations and everything at the state level that you overlook zoning. So like I said, local municipalities can put those time, manner, and place restrictions on cannabis businesses. So just look out for those to make sure that your proposed location is in an area that they allow. And if there is zoning on point in your location, then you'll want a letter or verification from your local area that you're in compliance with the zoning. All right. And then one more thing to touch on probably is the experience and team. Your qualifications are required for cultivation, processing, and dispensing applications. So, just making sure that you have at least the bare minimum experience on there, some business experience, some cannabis experience, some medical experience if you can, just to have at least sort of the bare bones of a well-rounded team in your application. And then for local approval, I mentioned this earlier, but the local jurisdictions can require a separate approval, registration, application, or meetings maybe with the local government, just to essentially award you a license or to permit you to operate there at the local level. So make sure you're getting connected to your local government, you're paying attention to what's going on at the local level, and definitely make sure that they are going to accept cannabis businesses within their boundaries. As part of a strong business, it's always good to make those connections with charitable organizations, nonprofits, local organizations in your area that you can help support, so that the city council knows that you're not just trying to take from the area, but you're also giving back as well. So that's always important. Okay, and then the timeline generally for the application, like I said, it's a 30-day window to get awards after you submit. The state has hit their first target there of 30 days for some of the cultivation and processing applications. We're yet, kind of yet to see if they'll continue hitting their mark there. So you'll apply, you'll wait probably around 30 to 60, some states have taken much longer days to get that done. But continue to prepare in the meantime. Keep getting your ducks in a row and sorting out your business plans. Once you're approved for your license, definitely want to get started with then building, operating, and putting everything into motion. Okay, so let's then talk a little bit, let's dig a little bit deeper now into the application sections, and specifically into the more narrative sections. Well, first off, let's just talk a little bit at a high level about cultivation licenses. The cultivation licenses have 6 tiers. They range from up to 2,000 square feet to 100,000 square feet, and also have the micro cultivator options as well. As I mentioned, those micro cultivators do need to be Mississippi residents. For manufacturing, they have the option of micro and regular processor licenses. The micros would process under 2,000 pounds or between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds. And then the standard processor license would process no less than 3,000 pounds of biomass annually. And those application fees increase accordingly to the amount that you're planning to process. So for the micro, it's $5,500 and $75,000 respectively for your licensing and first annual fee. And then for the regular processor, it's $35,000. So kind of a big jump there from micro to standard. Okay, and now getting into some of the application sections themselves, you can see quite the laundry list of, of application narrative sections. First off, we have our business plan and management profile. And you'll want to note that there's the business plan and management profile, and there's also a business and financial plan. So you want to sort out how you're going to differentiate between those two sections. We also have the regulatory compliance plan. That's just an overview essentially of all of the regulations and how on a high level you're going to comply with each of them and how you're planning to carry that out. The operating plan summary, kind of an odd one here, as it is focused on qualifications. You'll see not just on your operating plan, but on your qualifications of your team. So a little more to that section than meets the eye. Then we have some other safety and security plans and procedures, business experience, a whole ton of SOPs here, SOPs for oversight, adverse event reporting, quality assurance and quality control, recall, packaging and labeling, inventory control, record keeping, waste disposal, cultivation, delivery, accounting, and then SOPs for security measures. Again, even though there's also a safety and security plan and procedures section above, SOPs for sampling and testing, and then for reporting your test results. So those are all of the narrative sections for the cultivation and manufacturing licenses. Dispensing is a little bit different than that, and we'll go into those next. And feel free to ask any questions, and we'll come back to those at the end. So then moving on to dispensing, dispensing doesn't have any tiers. One very important thing to note for dispensaries is that they must be at least 1,500 feet away from other dispensaries. So definitely important to note there. For the dispensary application, at least for the narrative compliance requirements, they require an operating plan. And within that operating plan, if you go to the regulations and you look up what an operating plan is, that's going to include your security, your employee qualifications, so including background checks and training, record keeping systems, hours of operation, and then your plans for preventing non-card holders from obtaining or attempting to obtain items.
I think you have to jump ahead one slide.
Oh, thanks, Bob.
Yep. Maybe one more.
Perfect. Nope. Yeah, thank you. And then the last plan down here at the bottom, preventing non-card holders from obtaining or attempting to obtain items sold by the dispensary. So essentially it's just making sure that, a plan for keeping minors from getting cannabis, and then from, keeping anyone else from obtaining your product. So limiting any diversion that might occur. And then there are a few other applications, generally a little bit less competitive, but these would be subject to the same requirements as the cultivation and processing applications we talked about above, testing, waste disposal, and transportation. And as I said, the state's already started to award a couple of these licenses, so you can check that out on their website. All right, and with that, I will wrap up talking about the application parts there and the list of SOPs, and I'll pass it over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Summer. And as everybody listening understands, trying to cram all of the details of multiple applications into a half an hour is a little bit of a task. But I think Summer did a great job on touching on all the different things you'll need to do to get a proper submission in place. And I just want to touch now on what's going to set you apart and how to get ahead of everybody else. Mississippi is not what we would typically call a competitive license. And for example, in the state of Georgia, they were only issuing 6 grower processor licenses for the entire state. And they had an open window where everybody who was pursuing those licenses had to submit their application in that window. It was December of 2020. And then the state grades those submissions like a test. And they received about 50 applications, and only the 6 that scored the highest were awarded licenses. And that's how states do competitive licenses. Mississippi's going a little bit of a different direction, where they're not putting a set number on the licenses, but that doesn't mean everybody who wants a license gets a license. Don't let that lull you into thinking all you have to do is submit something and you'll get a license. And by example, what I'll tell you is the state was set a goal of approving or denying applications within 30 days. Well, so far they've approved 7 applications. You can be sure they received more than 7 submissions when they opened the window. So probably more people have not been awarded their license at this point in that 30-day period than have been awarded their licenses. So it's important that as you look at all of this substantial amount of technical writing, that you do it completely and in as compliant as possible so that as they grade your application, it gets reviewed and approved on the first try. Let's go to the next slide. So, as Summer went through these in great detail, there's an operating plan, there's a security plan, there's a business plan. And what's so important is that you convince the state with the submission of this material that you should be awarded a license. And one of the places where people make a mistake is they put things in here that aren't necessarily compliant. So they may have something in their security plan that doesn't meet the state security requirements, and that would get you refused as deficient. You may have something in your security standard operating procedure that's different than what you wrote in your security plan. So these are all places where it's easy to trip and submit something that the state will flag. And it's like submitting your taxes. The IRS is looking for red flags. And if the state sees a red flag, you're going to get pulled aside. And while they likely will give you an opportunity to cure that deficiency, it takes more time. They're going to send it back to you, say it's deficient, you're going to have to correct it. And when you resubmit it, your 30-day period starts again. So you go to the bottom of the pile. And we've seen that for things as simple as the management profile. If people forget the resume of one of their owners or management members, they'll kick it back, and again, bottom of the pile. Next slide. And you don't want to get kicked back to the bottom of the pile because there's a definite advantage to a first to market position. In Mississippi, this is a medical program, so it's all about getting medicine to the patients, but patients will fall into habits. If you're the first one to open a dispensary in a town, you get press, you get written up in the local newspaper, and people know your name. And once people come and visit your store, you're likely to build a client base. And that gets more difficult for the second and third dispensary that open up. They become noise in the distance. So getting open first is very important. Same thing for cultivators. Once dispensaries get into the habit of their supply chain, where they get things from, they stick with it. So as a cultivator or a manufacturer or a dispensary, getting open first and establishing that customer base is very important. The other challenge in Mississippi is the location. So if you submitted an application and you have a location in a town and somebody ahead of you gets licensed first and you're within 1,500 feet, you can't open there. All of that local work you did, that property you found is now useless. You've got to go back to the drawing board and find another property. So that's certainly going to create some issues for people in Mississippi as they start issuing those dispensary licenses. Let's see how we're doing. Okay, we're running on time here. So Summer, I think one last slide here. Know your regulations. This is super important because regulations change. So just because you read the bill that passed originally doesn't mean you're up to date with the most recent regulations. Things definitely change. And if you're doing it off of memory from what you read, before any changes were made, again, you could write something that's not compliant. So keep up to date with any changes to the regulations, and look for anything, read it again and again, check for anything that you're unsure about. If there's something in there that you wrote a few months ago, read it again and make sure you're not citing something that has changed. And lastly, I'll mention that we have a team of about 20 people, ranging from attorneys like Summer and several other attorneys. We have technical writers. We have project managers, and this is what we do state after state. So whether you need help with one section, maybe you've written 90%, but there's an SOP that you're missing, or whether you're just starting this adventure and you need help from the beginning to the end, give us a call, shoot us an email. We can give you a really defined scope of how we can help you with whatever piece of the puzzle you're missing. So now we'll go over to questions and see if we got any questions in there. And most of those pertain to because they're specific.
Yep. All right. Let's see. It looks like we have a question from Grace Parker. Thanks, Grace. As far as residency, do all listed on the application have to be residents or one? And what proof is required? Let's see. So as far as micro businesses, that should be all residents. If it's an individual or if it's an entity. For cultivation and processing, if it's just one natural person, then that person has to be a resident, or it has to have had been a resident for 3 years. If it's a business, then 35% of the interests have to be held by a Mississippi resident, someone who's been a resident for 3 years. And then that provision actually, at least in the regulation, says that it will be repealed on December 31st of this year. So the end of this year, those residency requirements should be null. We'll see if they make any changes there. And then for the Department of Revenue, for dispensaries, they explicitly said that dispensaries don't require you to be a Mississippi resident. Let's see if we had any other questions come in or any come directly. Let's see. Oh, then you also asked what proof is required. The proof is listed in the regulations. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can send it over to you. I know that it's a short list of forms from the state. Did you have something to add there, Bob?
No, I was just gonna say, as we run out of time, I know people have limited time.
Oh yeah, we're a couple minutes over, so we can.
Don't hesitate to shoot any additional questions, over to info@thinkcanna.com, and certainly we'll reach out with however we can help you out.
Yep, absolutely. Feel free to give us an email. Email summer with 1 M at thinkcanna.com. I'll also be speaking at Cannabis Conference in August in Las Vegas on retail facility design and build out. And then also in October at Cannabis Industry Journal's Cannabis Quality and Conference Expo. That one's a mouthful. So definitely catch us out at some conferences if you're in the area. All right. Anything else to add, Bob?
No, I think we're good. I thank you everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I should mention one of our VPs, Lisa Jordan, is a Mississippi native. So we've been following Mississippi since the early days, working with some attorneys and lobbyists down there. It was great to see the program come to fruition. And now it's a matter of standing it up and making sure everybody, all the patients who need their medical cannabis can get it. Let's work together to make it happen.
Amen. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll send the recording around. Bye, everybody. Take care.